History isn't just about the powerful, it's about those who refused to stay defeated. Some of the greatest military minds weren't born into power. They didn't command vast empires. Instead, they took small, outmatched forces and used sheer strategy, innovation, and relentless effort to take down the mightiest enemies of their time. These are the top 10 greatest underdog generals in history. The men who proved that being outnumbered doesn't mean you have to lose. Number 10. William Wallace, the Scottish rebel who took on the English. William Wallace, the legendary leader of the Scottish resistance against English rule, is another strong contender for the underdog general spot. Leading a relatively small and ill-equipped army, Wallace fought fiercely against the vast and powerful English Empire during the First War of Scottish Independence in the late 13th century. Wallace's defining moment came at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, where he defeated a much larger English force under the command of John de Warenne and Hugh de Cressingham. What made this victory so remarkable was that Wallace used the terrain, specifically the narrow bridge and the surrounding landscape, to his advantage. He lured the English forces into a vulnerable position, and when they crossed the bridge, he attacked with full force, routing them completely. Though Wallace's forces were outnumbered and lacked the resources of the English, his guerrilla tactics, fearless leadership, and knowledge of local geography made him an extremely effective force against the English. Wallace's ability to inspire passion and loyalty in his soldiers, and his defiance against one of the world's most powerful armies, solidified him as a true underdog hero. Despite eventually being captured and executed by the English, Wallace's legacy as a symbol of resistance, freedom, and bravery in the face of impossible odds endures, making him a fitting final addition to the list of the greatest underdog generals. Number 9. Moshoeshoe I, the king who outsmarted two empires. Some leaders fight wars with armies. Others fight with their minds. Moshoeshoe I didn't just defeat one superpower, he outplayed two. As the 19th century rolled on, Africa was being torn apart by European colonization. Kingdoms fell one by one. But Moshoeshoe, leading the Basotho people, refused to let that happen. His strategy? Fortify, negotiate, and fight only when necessary. Instead of meeting the British or the Boers in open battle, he turned Thaba Bashu, his mountain fortress, into an impenetrable stronghold. Attack after attack failed. Enemies simply couldn't take it. When brute force didn't work, his enemies turned to deception. The Boers tried to claim his land through shady treaties, while the British pressured him into submission. But Moshoeshoe outmaneuvered them all, using his diplomatic genius to keep the Basotho kingdom intact. By the time European forces finally gained the upper hand, Moshoeshoe negotiated with Britain to turn his land into a protectorate, instead of being conquered outright. That's right, he convinced his enemies to defend him. Number 8. Shaka Zulu, the warlord who built an empire from nothing. Imagine a warrior so feared that his enemies preferred suicide over facing him in battle. That was the power of Shaka Zulu, a man who took a small tribe and transformed it into one of the greatest military forces Africa had ever seen. Born into exile and humiliation, Shaka wasn't supposed to rule. But through sheer willpower, he clawed his way to the top, seizing control of the Zulu people in the early 1800s. At the time, the Zulus were just one small tribe among many. The problem? Powerful rival clans surrounded them. So, Shaka changed everything. He reinvented warfare, scrapping traditional throwing spears in favor of the Iklewa, a short stabbing spear for brutal hand-to-hand combat. He drilled his warriors into an unstoppable force, introducing the buffalo horn formation, a deadly tactic that allowed his forces to surround and crush enemies from all sides. His strategy worked. Shaka's Zulu warriors obliterated rival clans, absorbing their soldiers into his ranks and growing his army into a feared war machine. At the height of his power, he had an army of 50,000 warriors, and his enemies knew that defeat meant total annihilation. Even European forces, armed with firearms, struggled against the Zulu tactics Shaka pioneered. His influence was so massive that when the British finally fought the Zulus decades later, they still feared the military machine that Shaka had built. Number 7. Yu Fei, the warrior who refused to surrender. How do you fight an empire when your own country is against you? Yu Fei, one of China's greatest generals, fought not only against a foreign invader, but also against betrayal from his own people. In the 12th century, the Jin dynasty launched a full-scale invasion against China's Song dynasty. The Song, overwhelmed and weak, were on the brink of collapse. The emperor himself fled south, leaving much of northern China under enemy control. Enter Yu Fei, a soldier with unbreakable loyalty and a gift for the battlefield. Leading an outnumbered force, Yu Fei outmaneuvered and outclassed the powerful Jin armies time and time again. His men fought with fanatical discipline, believing that no matter the odds, they could always strike back harder. He used lightning-fast attacks, deception, and clever terrain tactics to reclaim lost territory, an unthinkable feat for an underdog general. His greatest achievement? The Battle of Yancheng, where his forces, vastly outnumbered, delivered a devastating defeat to the Jin army, proving that China wasn't done fighting yet. But Yu Fei's biggest enemy wasn't on the battlefield. The Song dynasty, afraid of his rising power, betrayed him. The emperor ordered him arrested and executed, fearing that Yu Fei's victories could overshadow his own rule. Number 6. Lawrence of Arabia, the rebel who brought down an empire. What if one man could turn a ragtag group of desert rebels into the nightmare of a crumbling empire? That's exactly what T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, did. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire controlled vast swaths of the Middle East. The British needed a way to weaken them, but sending traditional armies into the desert was a death sentence. Instead, they sent Lawrence, a British intelligence officer who knew exactly how to turn a hopeless cause into a winning one. Rather than attacking fortresses and cities, Lawrence taught the Arab rebels how to wage guerrilla warfare. His forces blew up railways to cut off Ottoman supply lines, attacked small garrisons before vanishing into the desert, used deception and speed to make a tiny army seem much larger than it actually was. His most famous victory came at Aqaba, 1917. The Ottomans believed the city was safe, protected by the sea and mountains. But Lawrence led a brutal march through the desert, flanking the city from the one direction it wasn't defended. The result? A stunning Arab victory, and a turning point in the war. By the time the war ended, the once mighty Ottoman Empire was falling apart, and the Arab rebels, trained and led by Lawrence, had played a massive role in its downfall. Number 5. Von Win Giap, the mastermind who defeated superpowers. How do you defeat the strongest military powers on Earth when you have no money, no modern equipment, and no formal military training? Von Win Giap, the mastermind behind Vietnam's victory over both France and the US, did exactly that. Giap wasn't a career soldier, he was a history teacher. But when France tried to reclaim Vietnam as a colony, he transformed a small guerrilla force into an army that crushed them. His biggest victory? The Battle of Dien Bien Phu, 1954. The French had built a heavily fortified base, convinced that the Vietnamese had no way to bring artillery through the mountains. But Giap's forces hauled heavy weapons piece by piece through impossible terrain and then bombarded the French from above. After 56 days of relentless fighting, the French surrendered, marking the end of their rule in Indochina. Then came the US intervention in Vietnam. Again, Giap was outgunned and outnumbered, but he understood something the Americans didn't. Victory isn't about winning battles, it's about making the war unwinnable for the enemy. He turned Vietnam's jungles into a death trap, using tunnels, ambushes, and hit-and-run tactics to grind down the US military. The Tet Offensive, 1968, shocked the world, proving that even with overwhelming firepower, America wasn't safe. By 1975, Giap's forces stormed Saigon, and Vietnam stood victorious. Number 4. Scipio Africanus, the general who outclassed Hannibal. Imagine being a young, untested commander facing off against one of history's greatest military geniuses. That was the reality for Scipio Africanus, the man who took on Hannibal Barca and won. During the Second Punic War, Rome was on the brink of destruction. Hannibal had invaded Italy, crushed Roman armies, and was seen as unstoppable. But while most Roman generals played defense, Scipio had a different plan. He studied Hannibal's tactics better than anyone, learning how to counter his deadly strategies. Instead of facing Hannibal in Italy, Scipio took the fight to Carthage itself. His biggest moment? The Battle of Zama, 202 BC. Hannibal had never lost a battle in Italy, but Scipio forced him to fight on Roman terms. He neutralized Hannibal's war elephants by creating gaps in his lines, used superior cavalry to outmaneuver Carthaginian forces, adapted Hannibal's own tactics against him. The result? Carthage was utterly defeated, and Rome became the dominant power of the Mediterranean. Hannibal, once Rome's worst nightmare, was forced into exile, his empire in ruins. Number 3. Louis Botha, the Boer commander who humiliated the British Empire. Imagine leading a small, under-equipped army against the mightiest empire in the world, and winning. That's exactly what Louis Botha did in the Boer War, embarrassing the British in ways they never saw coming. At the dawn of the 20th century, Britain controlled vast territories across the globe. When they declared war on the Boers, 1899 to 1902, a group of South African settlers, they expected a quick and easy victory. But Botha, a farmer turned military mastermind, had other plans. Botha's forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no formal military training. The British, on the other hand, had cutting-edge weapons, a massive army, and years of combat experience. Yet in Black Week, 1899, Botha and his Boer commandos launched a devastating series of 3 humiliating defeats against the British at Stormberg, Magersfontein, and Colenso. His secret? Guerrilla warfare. While the British relied on traditional formations, Botha's men fought like shadows, hitting fast, disappearing into the mountains, and striking again. His mastery of hit-and-run tactics, sniper ambushes, and deep knowledge of the terrain made the world's most powerful army look like inexperienced recruits. Eventually, Britain adapted, pouring in 450,000 troops, an overwhelming force compared to the Boers' 80,000 fighters. But even as the war turned against him, Botha continued leading his men with tactical brilliance, forcing the British to negotiate peace rather than achieving the total victory they had expected. Number 2. Coos de la Rey, the Boer ghost who humiliated the British. What if a small band of farmers could outfight the most powerful empire on earth? That's exactly what Coos de la Rey, the Boer War's most elusive and brilliant commander, did. In the Second Anglo-Boer War, 1899 to 1902, Britain sent hundreds of thousands of troops to crush the tiny Boer republics in South Africa. But de la Rey had no intention of fighting a conventional war. Instead, he turned the war into a nightmare for the British. He used hit-and-run tactics, refusing to fight traditional battles. He set devastating ambushes, attacking isolated British columns before vanishing into the wilderness. He struck at night, using speed and deception to keep British forces constantly on edge. His greatest moment? The Battle of Tweebosch, 1902. Outnumbered and outgunned, de la Rey lured a British force into a trap. In just a few hours, his small band destroyed an entire British column, captured their general, and forced the British to negotiate peace. Number 1. Jan Žižka, the one-eyed warlord who never lost. What if I told you that a blind, one-eyed warlord led an army of peasants against multiple European crusades, and never lost a single battle? Meet Jan Žižka, the undefeated commander who turned farmers into warriors and revolutionized medieval warfare. In the early 1400s, the Holy Roman Empire launched crusades to crush the Hussites, a small religious group in Bohemia. The problem? Žižka stood in their way. He had no noble army, only peasants, farmers, and blacksmiths. But Žižka knew how to turn weakness into strength. He invented the war wagon, a mobile fortress armed with crossbows, cannons, and gunpowder weapons. Using these, he did the following: turned peasant militias into a disciplined force, defeated heavily armored knights with gunpowder weapons, crushed one crusade after another, even when outnumbered. Even after losing his second eye, Žižka kept leading his army, completely blind, and still won every battle. His enemies feared him so much that, when he died, they expected his army to collapse. Instead, the Hussites kept winning using his tactics, proving that Zizka had built a legacy of invincibility. History isn't just written by the victors, it's shaped by those who were never supposed to win. From guerrilla masterminds to battlefield innovators, these generals proved that strategy beats strength, intelligence defeats power, and the underdog can rewrite history. But what do you think? Did we miss any legendary underdogs? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe, because history is full of stories you won't believe.